maybe postpartum is not just a year to survive, but it's a time to be very intentional with ourselves, because there can be longer term impacts of what that period is like.
I'm Jamie Zaki, IBCLC and Mama 5, and this is the Breastfeeding with Confidence podcast, where pregnant and new mothers learn how to prepare for and overcome breastfeeding challenges without being controlled by stress, fear, and anxiety. Each week, we'll answer your questions, share breastfeeding success stories, and inspire you to shut out the toxic whispers of the world and embrace your God-given intuition to make confident breastfeeding decisions. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to the Breastfeeding with Confidence podcast. Today we have Dr. Jenna with us. And before we go ahead and get started and dive into this interview, I wanted to ask you just a moment to do something really important for me. If you are listening to the Breastfeeding with Confidence podcast and you are enjoying the podcast, please make sure that you are hitting subscribe and leave a review if you are on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because hitting subscribe and leaving those reviews tells the algorithm that this podcast is worth listening to and helps other new moms who need this kind of inspiration and support to find the podcast, to get answers to their breastfeeding questions, and feel inspired and encouraged. All right, let's dive in. Jenna, I'm so glad you are here. Can you introduce yourself to everybody and tell them a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Hi, Jamie. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Jenna Chody. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I practice in Washington State. I'm also a mother. I am a returned Peace Corps volunteer also, which actually kind of helped inform my my path into being a naturopathic doctor, but also my love for birth and postpartum. So I served as a volunteer in Senegal in West Africa. And my host mother was actually the village midwife. And so I saw was present for a lot of births there. And I was super remote, like out in the middle of nowhere, no electricity, no running water. And so you can imagine, birth was eye-opening. It was eye-opening. It was scary at times. It was magical most of the time. And just my appreciation and love for women and their strength was, I just developed so much respect for birthing women in that time, and actually came home and did doula training. I was a doula for some time. And then I found naturopathic medicine after that. And then kind of went on my journey, had my own kids. And that's kind of how I found my path. But I mostly focus now on, in my one-on-one practice, I mostly treat women in perimenopause and menopause. But I started off sort of working with preconception, fertility, pregnancy, postpartum. And then all those women started, had their babies and started entering perimenopause and menopause. And so and they were like, help, what's going on with my hormones? So that's how I transitioned into that work. But my love for birth and postpartum is strong. So
I love that. That is so cool. What a cool experience. I'm going to say I'm a little bit jealous, because that is really awesome. I would love to. My husband's in the military, and it's so funny because I've told him how I would love to do like one of those, like some type of like internship or whatever, like I hear of like student midwives going to these remote villages in Africa and learning how to support birth through them. And I'm always telling him how I would love to do something like that. And he was talking about wanting to deploy one time, and I got really mad at him. And he was like, that would be no different than you wanting to go to a remote village in Africa to help women have babies. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I get that, because that is like, it's something so unique, but it's like a mission. It's like one of those like things that you just are drawn to. And that is a really cool experience to help shape you. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's awesome. I love that. I know when we were talking about some of the topics to talk about, you said a lot of people think of postpartum and menopause being completely separate. And I have definitely thought that, because, I'm very much stuck in the conception, pregnancy world. And I hear my friends starting to talk about perimenopause and menopause. And I'm like, But could you tell us a little more about how they are not so separate and how they really are connected?
Yeah. So this was a concept that was introduced to me when I think when I was pregnant with my first. And so I have a 7-year-old and an almost 4-year-old. My youngest will be 4 on Tuesday. And yeah, and it was this concept that comes from Chinese medicine and also I think Ayurvedic medicine, that women, like the postpartum period really informs how we go through menopause and perimenopause. And we might be like, well, they could be, I mean, some women after they, depending on how old you are, right? After you birth babies, like some women are like, I work with women that are just thrown into perimenopause, like as they're in postpartum. But, a lot of women also may have babies at a younger age because this hormonal landscape that we, are part of our entire journey of our lives is so connected. Our postpartum period can really inform our hormones and cycles afterwards, which then feeds into that kind of menopausal, perimenopausal time. And what I notice in my practice is I always ask when I have a woman that thinks she's in perimenopause or isn't, we're just kind of determining, where she is in her hormonal journey. I will always ask if she's a mother, how pregnancies were and how she felt in her postpartum. And how that time went. And I see it just in my practice, a pretty strong connection between, sometimes it's mental health, kind of like a through line with mental health. Sometimes it's like really challenging periods, but I do see that connection. And not to say that women that, people that are listening to this, if you've had like a really challenging postpartum, or maybe you've had a really easy postpartum time, right? That it means that's what's coming up for you. But I think it can just it can help inform, and they're not completely separate spaces in time and journeys in time in our lives. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And what I'm hearing is that I think so many of us kind of hear how hard postpartum can be, and we're like, okay, it's just a year. We've just got to survive it. And what I'm
Mm,
hearing is maybe postpartum is not just a year to survive, but it's a time to be very intentional with ourselves, because there can be longer term impacts of what that period is like. So I know
mhm.
we've talked a little bit about the 6-week checkup and how that goes and everything in the questionnaire. And, if we're going to talk about being more intentional with postpartum and caring for yourself, what do you think that should look like as opposed to what it currently looks like for the mainstream for most parents?
Yeah, so I have a lot to say about this. And, it really, I think, comes down to changing our entire medical system and paradigm, which is a big, thing to tackle, right? But you know, I think what I would really love to see is for our society and for our medical system to center mothers more, to center women more. Like it's only become so in the early, a lot of people don't know this, that it just in the early 90s, it became required for women to be part of medical studies, just in the
Wow.
early 90s. And so before that, they were still part of medical studies, but because we weren't sure if they were going to be pregnant or not, and oh my gosh, are these drugs or whatever going to affect, fertility? We don't know. Let's just keep them out of the studies. So for the longest time, we haven't been studied. Our bodies have not been studied. And not to say that we need to get in there and study women, but we don't fully understand the woman's body and how her physiology is completely different from man's physiology. We are not small men. We do not function like small men. We are completely unique and different. And I'm getting a little sideways from your question, but I think it just speaks to, and I think it's really changing and turning around right now. Menopause especially is really having its moment, but we still just, this sentiment around in postpartum, and we see this in menopause too, when our bodies have changed. We have gone through this birth portal and we are a changed person. We are not at all the same person that we were before that, right? And any mother will say, yes, that is absolutely true. And in our society, all the message that we get over and over is get back to it. Right? We put the women that go to yoga right away, like up on a pedestal, or like get back at it. And like, there's nothing wrong with that. That's amazing if your body is truly feeling that way, but we should not be celebrating only women that are like getting back to it, right? Because our bodies need time to go through that transition, both physically, I mean, there's so many physical changes, but emotionally, spiritually, like we go through so much in our pregnancy, in our birth and postpartum. I mean, so much is changing in our bodies. And at 6 weeks, I was just sort of like figuring out which way was up at that point. Like, I'm like, yeah, of course I want to visit at 6 weeks, but I also want to visit at 12 weeks. And I also want to visit at 24 weeks. Like, it's almost like we should reverse, like we have all these prenatal visits. What if we reverse that and did like the postpartum visits in the same order?
Right.
Like I think that's the care that we need and that we deserve. And mothers are at the core, the foundation of our society, and we don't treat them that way. We don't treat women are the creators of this world. We are the ones who create life,
Yeah.
Yes, when men are important, obviously. And we have to center women and mothers, like their work in this world is so foundational and so important. And I would just love for us to change our medical system such that we can care for the whole body, care for the whole woman in that time. So I have all sorts of ideas, but no one's asked me. So
because I love that. What I'm hearing is, it's almost reflective of society. Like the medical care that we get as women is almost reflective of how we're valued in society, because motherhood it's a secondary plan for so many people. And I'm not saying that motherhood should be everybody's primary plan, but it's kind of it's not treated as a worthy goal. If that is your goal, is to become a mother, it's treated kind of as this like burden, this side plot that you kind of get thrust into. And I think, we start out with birth control. You better prevent pregnancy. And like, obviously we want to make good choices around pregnancy. But if we're so focused on preventing pregnancy that we're actually interfering with our bodies in the process, and then we are thrust into motherhood with this attitude of like, oh gosh, you've just ruined your entire life and career. Like, how can we transition into motherhood with a healthy mindset and body if we have been forced on this track of kind of like you said, like be like men, and all of a sudden it's like our bodies, society is saying this, and our bodies don't change based off what society wants. We try to change them, but it doesn't work that way. And then we end up in that 6-week postpartum haze, getting ready to go back to work, feeling like we're not supposed to be leaving our babies, but this is what society is telling us to do. How do you see that impacting the postpartum wellness experience?
Hugely. And, I think this is where community comes in, and unfortunately, it's not available for everybody, right? Like, how wonderful would it be? Like, there's cultures all around the world that like moms don't do anything for 40 days, right? Or like, I think it's even 60 days in some cultures. Like that is, I mean, I don't know, maybe some moms would not want that. I don't know. But like, I think just the community aspect of us taking care of each other is so important. And, I think that in our society, like I don't live anywhere near my parents. Like we've been coming along on this track of independence for so long. We, as women, we want our independence. As families, we want our independence, and we want to choose if we want to live near our in-laws or not. And that's awesome. That's like great. But I think along that track, we've also chosen isolation and, where we're not near family members. And as women, we're like, well, I got this. I can do this all myself. I'm so strong. Yes, you are effing strong. And it is okay for you to ask for help. It is okay for people to take care of you. It is okay for people to come in and clean your home and cook for you and hold the baby while you go take a nap. And it's not okay for people to come in and just sit down on your couch and want to chat about how things are with baby when you're exhausted, right? Like, I think asking for, and it takes, it's like, well, we're back to the woman now having to ask for what she needs. But as a culture too, I think we need to, when we see a new mother, we learn of a new mother in our community, like we should all be reaching out and, caring for her. And I think, yeah, it kind of comes from both angles. And that community aspect, I think is really important. And again, is depending on where you are, is harder to come by than in other places.
Yeah. No, I can relate to that so much because I'm also geographically dislocated from my family. And I've been so blessed that my mother-in-law and mom have, every time we've had a baby, made an effort to come out and spend a couple weeks each to help and to be that support. But that too can be very like, oh, I feel like I have to entertain and care for them and everything. And even though that's not, they're like, rest, it's still, there is that pressure. And it's hard to find that balance. What are some of the misconceptions that you think moms have about healing in the postpartum? Maybe not even just from the asking for help perspective, but I know mental health challenges come with so many different angles and layers. And it's something we talk about on this podcast a lot when we're talking about how to really care for your body in a practical sense. And when you start feeling those emotions coming, like understanding what's normal, what's not normal, and how to address that. Because I think so many people, I remember when I was struggling with my first, I had a horrible birth. I was having a horrible time breastfeeding. And when I was losing my mind, instead of anybody like trying to help, they were just like, we can write you a prescription. And it was like, sometimes medicine is needed. Yes, I don't want to discount like the necessity of that tool, but I believe it is a tool and it's not like a solution, and it's often thrown as a solution. So how do you recommend that mothers who are struggling and maybe are isolated, how can they take care of themselves postpartum so that their mental health does not just completely dissolve? Or how can they kind of take a step back and look at, what's really going on here?
Yeah, there's so much there. And I think,
yeah, it was a loaded question. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I think that first of all, like taking a breather, and I know that that is not possible for everyone, right? Like some women do need to get back to work right away and way sooner than they're ready. But our bodies take they just take a long time to heal. They take a long time to recover. And good God, is birth like, even if you have the smoothest birth, like your vagina just like blew open, your cervix, like do you know how big 10 centimeters is? I mean, I don't think men understand how big 10 centimeters is. Like, and then if you have a C-section, you still, I mean, that's major abdominal surgery.
Yeah.
Like a C-section, women that have had a C-section, it's the only surgery in this country that I know of that doesn't have the like adequate recovery and like plan for recovery, and even like physical therapy and/or oh my gosh, pelvic floor physical therapy. Like even for women that have C-section, like your pelvic floor has still been involved through this process. So I think just, I want to say, like, give yourself so much grace. You just did one of the hardest damn things that humans can do. Like, you just did it. And just to like hold yourself, give yourself a huge hug or pat on the back or whatever it is. And like, if you need to cry it out. If you need a hug, like, ask for a hug. But like, you just did so much, and just give yourself grace and time, and know you do not need to go back to yoga, and hopefully you don't have to go to work, back to work. And if you do, are there ways? Okay, so let's talk about practical ways. So I think that I love this teaching from the Red School, which is an organization that I follow, and they talk about the 1% rule. And this actually applies to our cycles. Like if we can change our trajectory by 1%, or change our mindset by 1%, or change what we're doing by 1%, we can completely change the outlook of whatever we have going on. If you ask like a sailor, if they change their direction by 1 degree, they will end up in a completely different place than they started in, right? Wow. So it makes a really big difference. And so, okay, so you're going back to work. Let's take the woman that's going back to work at 6 weeks. That's a lot, like my heart is just with you. And when you come home, is there a way for you to put your feet up for 5 minutes? Can you grab yourself some protein right when you walk in the door? Can you go to bed earlier than you normally do? Could you ask a partner or a friend to come help you put baby down? Or, there's like these really small ways that can make a really big difference. And hopefully you have providers in your world that you can reach out to that are holistically minded. And, if you want the prescriptions, they're there for you. And if you don't, then they have other ideas for you. Therapists that you can work with. I mean, there are so many tools available, and we can just be so in it. But having grace with yourself and just remembering that even like the small little things that you do early on can make such a big impact for your like overall postpartum recovery.
Hey Mama Bear, sorry to interrupt, but if you are one of these moms who's going back to work before you are ready, or even at 12 weeks or 16 weeks, and you are worried about making breastfeeding work when you go back to work, I want to help you create a breastfeeding plan, a pumping plan to keep your breastfeeding goals at the center and make practical decisions around continuing breastfeeding. Go ahead and visit littlebearlactation.com/support to book a consult today.
I love that analogy because I was kind of tracking what you were saying with the 1%, and then you used the sailor analogy, and I was like, wow, that's really profound. That's really profound. And just as you were talking, I was just kind of envisioning my own life and thinking about this little phone. If you could just reduce the amount of time that you're on your phone, comparing yourself to other people, not sleeping, getting that blue light exposure when your eyes should be closed, how much of an impact just putting that phone down for an extra 10 minutes could make.
Totally.
Yeah. What resources do you have for moms to thrive in postpartum?
I think you found me through my blog. I have a blog that I mostly recently have written about a lot more perimenopause topics and on hormone health topics, but I do have quite a few on there for women in the postpartum phase of life, particularly one on holistically supporting mental health. I walk through different herbs and minerals and nutrition and all sorts of different things, movement. And then I also have a handout that I've put together for kind of like helping moms feel more balanced. Although I hate that word balance because that's just not a thing at all in life, right? Especially as a mom. But just kind of like my like top 5 things that I try to help women incorporate into their lives to just,
Yeah.
find a little bit more balance, whatever word we want to use there.
I do have one more question that just kind of popped into my head as you were talking. You mentioned earlier that sometimes you have moms that you work with who are in the postpartum phase and kind of get thrown into perimenopause while they're navigating postpartum. Can you give us a few signs of what that might look like to know, like, hey, this might be beyond the normal postpartum and this might be something that needs a little more attention?
Yeah, it's complicated. It's tricky. I'm just thinking about a couple women in my practice that is the case for. I want to say like exhaustion, but what mother does not feel exhausted? But it's like just so exhausted for, and kind of like beyond the what we consider kind of the postpartum window. And then having those like signs of hormone imbalance longer than we would expect, again, outside that window, whether that's like, really irregular periods or really heavy periods or maybe lost periods. Sometimes hot flashes come in, and that can be a normal part of the postpartum, but like, sort of the extended time past when we would expect for those, hormonal shifts to be happening postpartum. It doesn't always go based on age, but I would say, kind of like the early to mid 40s can be a time. And I think it's challenging because what's going on is when we're postpartum, like our hormones naturally go on a little bit of a roller coaster to find their new rhythm, right?
Especially if you're breastfeeding.
Yes, exactly. And that's totally normal. It's going to go up and down. Things are going to feel a little like unstable. And then they kind of naturally even out. When we're in perimenopause, that's exactly what's going on. Our hormones are going up and down and up and down and all over the place. And so you don't feel like you're at that equilibrium where you're like, oh yeah, I'm back to my like regular cycles. And I don't want to say back because sometimes they can look very different than before, even for women that are not in perimenopause, but you don't feel like you're in any sort of equilibrium or balance. Then that might be an indication that, oh, okay, yeah, like your hormones are just on that typical perimenopause roller coaster that's
Yeah.
happening. Is that helpful? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect
Okay.
sense. And this is another, probably a more personal question, just because I've always wondered, and since we're talking about it, is there any correlation with when somebody starts going through perimenopause based off at like how many pregnancies they've had, how long they've been pregnant, when they had their pregnancies? Do you ever see any correlation based off
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Our hormone landscape is just, it's all connected, right? It's like goes from menarche to menopause, and it's all connected. Not to say that like anything that you do in your teens is going to like absolutely mess anything up
Right,
in your
right.
in your menopause years. But yeah, it does, and I think it really comes back to how your body is recovering after each of those pregnancies. Like having a pregnancy, being postpartum is a big stressor to the body. And if the body doesn't have that time to kind of recalibrate, right, then we're back on like a big hormone journey, then that's going to influence hormones. You could have that perimenopause experience a little earlier. So that's kind of how that can influence that.
Yeah, that's interesting because I had
Yeah.
always wondered, and I mean, this is just me being completely ignorant of what happens after pregnancy when you start menopause. Because I'm like, I realized I have absolutely no knowledge of that entire phase of being a woman, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
But I was curious. I was like, does not have like if you're pregnant and breastfeeding for say 10 years, does that put like kind of like you said, put more stress on the body and mean that phase could come earlier? Or is it like, oh, you paused cycles, you have all these eggs that are going to want to come, so now it's like menopause is extended to later?
Oh, yeah. We have to be really much more intentional with how we care for our bodies.
Yeah.
If we're doing preconception, prep, and pregnancy and postpartum for 10 years, you've got to be so intentional about what you're putting in your body and how you're taking care of it, right? Minerals, fiber, protein, lots of water, lots of rest. You've got to be building your system because that's a lot that's being drained from you. And so for someone that maybe is doing that for a decade, and then our hormones are just they're just responding to our system and our stressors in our body. And so if we've got all this stress going on and we're not fueling and not taking care of ourselves in the way that that our body wants, then yeah, our hormones are going to start dropping off a lot earlier than what we consider quote unquote normal. So yeah.
That's so interesting. I just think of all the big families I know, and I'm like, I mean, I'm one of them. I've got a big family, but I know people with much bigger families than mine. And I'm always wondering, like, at what point does the body just say, like, this is enough? Or does that just all extend? Like, oh, now your window is this much later.
I was going to say is you said something about pausing cycles. So we want women to cycle. So the cycling of our hormones is very protective for our body. And so when we're in perimenopause and we start losing those fertile cycles, that is when, and that's when our hormones start dropping off. So that is what makes us more susceptible to, cognitive stuff and heart stuff and bones. Like it really impacts our bones. So it's very protective for us to cycle. And so I actually don't know. That's a really great question though, for somebody to be not to be cycling for like a decade because they've been breastfeeding. I'm going to ask a midwife friend about that. I'm not actually 100% sure, but I do know that it's very protective for our bodies to cycle.
Yeah,
because that's sort of dangerous things about birth control, taking birth control for so long, because it stops.
Absolutely.
At least oral birth control, because it stops your cycles.
Yeah. And that's something that I've always, because, all the literature out there talks about how protective breastfeeding really is against so much.
Yeah.
That can happen, how protective breastfeeding is. But then, you learn about how the cycling is protective. And I mean, I guess if we're on a roller coaster, maybe that's the buffer there, there's still some type of cycle, just not the same cycle. I don't know. But that's something I've been just personally curious about. Well, thank you for sharing all of that wisdom. So if people want to find you, you mentioned your blog and you are on Instagram at Dr._Jenna. Is that correct?
Yes.
Awesome. Do you have anything else that you would like to share with the moms listening? Do you have one last word of wisdom, or if there's one big takeaway that you want them to remember?
I think just remember your goodness. I think we are all going through so much in this world right now, and we have such a big responsibility in our caring for this next generation who is, I'm getting emotional because I'm just thinking about my kids. Like, they are our future. And we just giving ourselves so much grace and remembering that we are starting this new paradigm in taking care of ourselves and centering women. And it's really exciting to be a part of. And just remember that you're part of that, and you do not have to be good, quote unquote, at all. And but just that you are innately good, and that you're doing amazing work in this world.
I got chills as you were talking about that, because that's so much of why we're doing this podcast. I often think of the generational wisdom that we have lost over years of industrialization and women being completely disenfranchised from their bodies and how their bodies work as mothers. And we're coming back to that, and to kind of see some of these shifts happening culturally, it's really exciting. And it is exciting to be a part of. And I often look at my kids, and we have a couple of our friends just had babies and they had home births. And I had my first was a C-section, and then a hospital birth, and then home birth. So I had kind of had all the experiences, and I was helping one of my friends with breastfeeding her new baby, and her daughter was sitting right there, watching and learning. And her dad kind of was like, "Can you just leave us alone?" And I was like, "No, she needs to be here. Let her stay, because she needs to be here. Because when she has her babies, this is going to be normal for her." And he was mind blown. And he was like, "You're right." And I was just thinking about how my own kids, I've got 3 boys and 2 girls. And I'm like, I know my daughter is probably going to do everything the least holistic way just to spite me. But my boys, I know I can see them just being so much more supportive of holistic options, or just, listening to a woman's intuition, because they see that in our family, we have started that, listening to your intuition, going against the grain, asking the questions. And just you saying that, it's there's something shifting, and it's exciting to be a part of that.
It is really exciting. So whenever I have my period, we communicate my cycle in our family. It is known where I am in my cycle, because if I can do that and ask for support when I'm actually just about to start my period today, and I'm exhausted. My tolerance is low. I need help, and everybody knows that. And I will let my kids know that mama's going to be on the couch today because my period's about to start. And when I'm bleeding, I actually collect my menstrual blood, and they'll see it in the bathroom and ask about it. And my son is he's kind of weirded out by it, which is just so funny, because it's not, I don't know, it's nature versus nurture, but it's really important to normalize that for me. And it's okay. And we can talk about it. And it's actually my superpower. And
that's cute. I love that. I love that so much, because my older boys, they, had learned with me having babies. They were like, "Oh yeah, mommy bleeds out," because I bleed a lot for way too long after having babies. And so they're, they follow me into the bathroom. They got a front row show. And now that I'm starting to get back into my cycles, they're like, "Wait, but you didn't have a baby." And I'm like, "Well," and so explaining it to them. And it's so funny with my second, because he's the one who tests my patience just a little more. And last time I had my period, I looked at him and I was like, "Do you remember that thing where mommy bleeds sometimes and doesn't have patience because it's all bleeding out of her?" And he was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And then he was so sweet. And I was like, I love him so much, but now I'm a little nervous that if somebody's being impatient, he's just going to ask them, "Is your patience bleeding out of your vagina?" I'm like, I have to, because he's just forward like that. So now I'm like, I have to be really careful with how much I tell him, just because he will tell it to everybody else.
Yeah, but that's so sweet though. I love that.
It is. We're changing the world, and it's important. And our boys will be good husbands one day because of it.
I think so.
I think so too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was so great to have you here. And thank you so much for
Thank
all of the wisdom that
you.
you shared. I'm going to share all of your information in the show notes for the moms listening. And if you need support with your hormones, whether you are breastfeeding or if you're listening in your post or perimenopausal, because I do have some people who are not currently breastfeeding who listen just because they're birth workers or nurses and want to learn
nursing.
more. So if you are
Mhm.
listening and you need support with that, go chat with Dr. Jenna. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamie.
All right, Mama Bear, that is a wrap for today. If this episode helped you feel a little more confident or a little more prepared for breastfeeding, can I ask you a quick favor? Go ahead and leave me a review. It helps other moms find this podcast and join us in this amazing community of fierce and confident Mama Bears. And hey, if you know a friend who could use some encouragement or real talk about pregnancy, breastfeeding, and all things motherhood, share this episode with her. You've got this, Mama Bear. Trust your instincts, stay fierce, and I'll catch you in the next episode.